Scott's newer think tanks. We started out in London, Washington, just over a year ago, early 2015. Since then, we've done 60-odd discussions in London, DC, and increasingly New York. The aim being to look at the really big issues of the 21st century. Sometimes we look at really big issues, sometimes we look at granular ones. This evening, we are looking at the US election in both broad and narrow senses, looking particularly at social media data and what this election tells us about how things are changing. We've got a really good panel this evening. Frank Spring, Truman National Security Project, also a global fellow at PS21, also a Democratic political strategist. We used him on a UK election discussion in Britain after the May election. Really serious expert. Scott, American University Associate Professor, quoted in a Thomson Reuters piece on the Republican social media strategy, which I encourage you all to Google him and look up and read. Also into social media or manner of other interesting things. I want to start with you, Scott. I mean, you talk about Trump. I mean, what are the lessons of the Trump candidacy so far, aside from that no one? It took a long time for people to see the obvious that he was winning. Right?
Typos can be your friend. How they show you're real, i.e., Donald J. Trump is actually tweeting and he's going direct, as opposed to having a spokesperson, campaign person, or aide do it, that always seems mediated and artificial and scripted and messagey. And Trump is also, I think, an example, case study of doing so many things differently and seemingly wrong and yet seemingly works out, which might just mean don't do everything Donald Trump does, but experiment like Donald Trump does. I consider him to be the Uber of US politics. He's disrupting a system that wasn't working, just like taxi systems and taxis across the country. And literally the Republican Party, at least, if not the whole US political system, to me, has created this Frankenstein Trump. And right now, it doesn't look like anyone can stop the monster.
I mean, to an extent, we saw something similar with Bernie Sanders, right? He was a similar model on the left.
That's what's so fascinating about it. And by the way, I'm a registered independent. I am not on any campaign team or anything like that. And you can follow me on Twitter at Talan, at T-A-L-A-N. So Bernie's the parallel other side. There's no reason a senator like that should be doing this well against a juggernaut called Clinton. But because of the ecosystem that's been set up, and also I think because he has a very clear, consistent message that's resonating with people in person and online, that he has had success as well. If I was betting money in Vegas, I would not bet Bernie will win unless an email from Hillary comes up, which, by the way, email is social media. I just want to add that in because it's often overlooked. It's not sexy. It's not going anywhere. It'll be with us forever. But email is social, especially when you consider about targeted newsletter and politics, and also open rates, pass-along rates, sharing. That email is the unglamorous success story of social media that will continue to play a force.
I mean, Frank, for the more established political machines, Trump is like a nightmare that they can quite see coming.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the oddest thing about Trump's ascendance is actually a really dull point of election law, but a really important one, which is this is a guy who only bought his voter file and started to get into the data and analytics game. It's not quite clear when this happened. It was at least, the earliest would be late October. More likely it was probably November or December before he really had the kind of data and analytics machine that drives a voter turnout apparatus really up and running. And even then, I would suspect it's still probably just being integrated into his various field offices. So, I mean, he seems to be running, to all appearances, been running almost a fieldless campaign. And that is, anathema, certainly anathema to people like me. I mean, I came out of the field, and, we like to think that, we are the only way to do it, which is, if you're in a tight race and you need to win by 3 points, I would still maintain you do need this. But if you are, the Frankenstein's monster of the American right, and have come up with a formula that taps in, for your own candidacy, that taps in so deeply into what this disaffected and this universe of disaffected Republican and independent voters and new voters as well. If you can tap into them, then you can run on momentum over organization for all the way to a nomination. Whether that will work in a general, I think, is a much more interesting question.
But yeah, how is the general different to the primaries?
I think there's a lot of wrinkles with the primaries that Trump could have some pitfalls because every state has their own laws and practicalities to it, and voter take all, voter win all or not. and percentage points, thresholds, etc. That a few months ago was Trump even paying attention to, hey, deadlines and getting enough signatures to be on the ballot, which, by the way, sounds simple, but there's been candidates in history that have not done enough signatures to be on the ballot. I used to be an elected official in California, city council member and mayor, and I got twice as many signatures as I needed because it'd be awfully embarrassing to say you're running and not get on the ballot, right? So there's these aspects to it. But in the general, psychology and human choice radically alter. So right now, Rubio, Cruz, and others, and Kasich for now, because Carson seemingly is out, do have a point about these choices are helping Trump. There's more choices splintering the other. When it comes down to one or the other, boy, things can change. It's just the psychology of either or and what that means. There's a third
Which
choice.
is the Jeremy Corbyn syndrome we had in the UK, right, where someone managed to win because there were three moderates and one radicalist. So one
Surprise,
radical
surprise, surprise, right? So Bloomberg, who is the most reluctant political leader, he's never ran for politics since mayor. So is he still going to run? We don't know. We'll see. He can really throw it up. But if he doesn't, I hear from Republicans that will vote for Hillary over Trump, right? But then you also hear there's people that are Democratic that would vote for Trump over Hillary.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we're seeing some, we could see some whites at the general potentially endorse Hillary, right? Or primary against Trump. And I don't know whether that helps Hillary or Trump.
Isn't that perversely crazy, perfectly right? And look at Mitt Romney today. I'm one of the nicest guys in politics, which is probably why he's not president, coming out with this pretty direct speech against Trump.
But if that becomes an implicit Hillary endorsement, it's not clear that
It could help.
how that plays.
Isn't it amazing? The things that would normally hurt Donald Trump or hurt someone else that isn't Donald Trump, Donald T. Duck if he was running, help Donald J. Trump.
That's right. And one of the things that's been really revealing about this, I think, is I've really enjoyed the media storm around, like, why doesn't the Republican establishment do something about this madman? And, Romney's speech today, I think, sort of really gave us indication. What Republican establishment? Why don't Republicans stop Trump? Who are we talking about? No one is minding the store. Romney, a two-time failed candidate, once he made the nomination and lost, but, a two-time failed candidate, is apparently the elder statesman of this party. There just isn't this Republican establishment that is in a position to pull some sort of lever of power. And the question sort of becomes, when was the last time the Republican establishment, this group of sort of wise elders that guide that party's operations, when was the last time anyone actually saw these people? When did they last exercise any meaningful effect? How long? Essentially, how long has the wizard been behind the curtain? Maybe there's no one there at all.
I'm laughing because I heard someone whose name I don't remember, and probably no one in this room knows him, because he's some party person in some state that isn't California or New York or the non-state of DC, that basically said, I've been in these rooms, and let me tell you, the discussion is the brokered convention. Now, let's assume this is true. This is probably still going to help Trump again, that now the elites are saying, we're going to choose who we want, not who you want. And Wolf Blitzer, if we see him here in DC, I ran into him once outside the Barnes & Noble Bethesda. We got to help him get his game up, man. I know he's been around, but when he shouts out a quick question on Super Tuesday night to whether it's Cruz or Rubio about, what about a brokered convention? That's pretty lame. And that's so far down the line to be so speculative, to be like, that's a high school journalism student question. Right? There's so many other questions before that should be answered now about not some speculative brokered convention, which if I was betting, I bet would not happen.
I mean, talk about how things like data and the field campaigns have changed over the last, say, 8 years since Obama. I mean, Obama again proved you could come out of not quite nowhere, but relative nowhere pretty fast. I mean, I remember up until February of 2008, a fair chunk of Brits didn't know who Obama was. By April, he was the next president. I mean, how's that game changed in the last 8 years, Frank?
So I think, they're both. These are sort of big forces that are at work in the American electorate. And Obama, the comparison of Obama to Donald Trump, in some respects, a completely absurd one, is actually really interesting. If you take the thesis that between 2000 and 2008, the essential identity of the American character was called into question in two very important ways, which is every American alive now is either born into or came of age from the post-war American deal, which is you work hard, you play by the rules, and you win. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is we're the good guys. We fight on the side of right and truth, and we win because in every good story the good guys win. And between 2000 and 2008, both of those things were called seriously into question. I would love to lay all of that at the feet of George W. Bush. I can't. A lot of those forces began before him, although he certainly worsened them, I would argue. But after the economic crash, America was a place where you could work hard, play by the rules, and lose spectacularly, lose everything. And there's a real question about whether or not we were the good guys, and if we were, why are we not powerful? Why were we not able to win these wars that we started? Entered this figure who, in thought, word, and very person, represented a change that seemed to sort of be the salvation for this country, the identity of which had been radically questioned, and then layer on top of that. So, for the mother of all change elections, you've got this figure who personally represents change. Layer on top of that what was then the most professional campaign in the history of humanity, I would argue, and you get this tidal wave that may yet guarantee his party a third term in the White House. But that change, but the reparation of that identity didn't reach everyone. There are still people who work hard, play by the rules, and lose, and there are a lot of them because the recovery. I mean, we get into the details of the recovery in great detail. But the truth is, there's still some very distressed communities out there, and some people who worked hard, play by the rules, and lost.
Just something about minority voters recently, some analysis done come from upper income where it's low unemployment, and Trump's voters come from lower income, high unemployment. So in this economics part that you're talking about, right?
Exactly, and then there is still this question, and then something like ISIL raises the question, like they particularly are pushing a series of buttons, both making a section of the electorate afraid for themselves, and also they are so, I mean, I would use the word cartoonish, but the reality of their evil was so real and so painful. They're so cartoonishly evil that they challenge the American character just on the notion of their existence. If you're the good guys, we're the good guys, why are these people allowed to exist? Trump is a response to their existence and that economic stuff. So that challenge to the American identity is still around. He's got that momentum. Whether he can then layer a professional campaign on that is a real question.
Before I go back to your questions, to follow up on this, and if you add in our somewhat tepid response to ISIS and Syria, and some could argue this presidency was partly responsible for the lack of strong response early on for Syria that led to this, including the problem with the migrants, and you trace all this stuff together, which is goes to show you how important the U.S. president can be.
I mean, this is not dissimilar to 98, right? I mean, inevitably, every president, is therefore blamed for everything that's gone wrong in the world in their term. Probably, with too much blame, probably put George W. Bush's door, and probably too much Barack Obama. So people will run against that record, and Trump is doing that kind of relatively.
Well, this gets to the point, like, it becomes clear to see ISIS and the videos, which I refuse to personally watch the bloodthirsty ones. I will watch the recruiting ones with the rock video and we want wives come to here. I'll watch those. I will not watch the bloody violent ones. But those get watched, and then when Trump says we're going to kill those, that's a lot more believable than Obama with a policy of engagement and Russia's tough. Gee, what are we going to do? And I think this feeds So back to your question. Obama used something which still doesn't get talked about and seems so obvious called Black Planet. And he was the candidate that could use this social network, which is still existent, and it seems like an obvious targeting, but not a lot of people were doing that at the time with social networks, right? The other thing Obama did that was sort of gamification of the campaign was, if you campaigned for Obama and you put up 10-yard signs and talked to 20 people, that would go on an internal server and people could see how well you did versus them, and they had prizes for the best. So they were gamifying who was doing the most on sort of this basic stuff of the field work, right? They were really smart at this concept of, like, Jane McGonigal wants to save the world, well, Obama saved the campaign and helped push them forward.
But Obama's supporters want to be modern, right? Trump's supporters seem to want to be a bit more old-fashioned. It's a different kind of model.
Well, the example I was going to give was not Trump, but Cruz, what he's done with Facebook. So, Frank, you can talk more about this if you want, but it's pretty sophisticated, and weirdly now, a contradiction. With Cruz and the Constitution and privacy and all that, he's actually using people's data from Facebook way deeper than almost any candidate has before. And this is the person that's supposed to be concerned about privacy, and yet I'm sure there's a user agreement that says somewhere buried that the Cruz campaign will do X, Y, and Z and maybe C.
I think that's right. And Cruz is the guy. I mean, when you talk about new and interesting stuff in digital and data and campaign, Ted Cruz is really what we're talking about. And I want to emphasize, I am not a data or a digital specialist. I commission them on campaigns. I'm not an expert on them. But what he has done really links up what I would see as the three big driving forces behind change in election science: new technologies, data particularly where you find it. Social media is in many respects a much more useful place to mine and harvest data than it is to propel a message out. So for a campaign, they draw a lot more out from social media than they push out on it. And then behavioral science. And Ted Cruz's firm, Cambridge Analytica, are the people who drive his tech and data. Their stuff on
They are spending millions of dollars just with that
amazing.
firm. Millions of dollars just with that firm.
But it's not, doesn't appear to have worked. Well, I mean, that is a minor but important detail.
What you're measuring
But you
against.
could argue that compared to Jeb Bush and the dozen of other candidates who may or may not be more experienced or better or not, or whatever your adjective is, that it's worked really well, that he is the number 2 guy to Donald Trump, who shouldn't have existed in the first place.
Sure. I mean, if you're looking at Ted Cruz, the comparison for its effectiveness is not how is it done versus this guy who's tapping into this incredible groundswell of angry passion. The question is, your comparison point is Ted Cruz without Cambridge Analytica. Now, we won't ever really know what that was like, but this is, I mean, in many respects, a pariah within his own party.
Donald Trump has more U.S. senators endorsing him, I think one, Jeff Sessions from Alabama, than Ted Cruz does.
Yeah, Ted Cruz is universally loathed within his own caucus. The fact that he is at this position is, it's a testament to
that kind of takes us back to one of the interesting things, right? Is that whether Hillary makes it or not, it's kind of harder to imagine other people making it down that Hillary elite route. The Republican front bench this time is pretty much all, with the exception of maybe, Rubio and Bush, who, the latter didn't really get very far. They're people who've run against their own party the whole time. Sanders, someone who ran against the party the whole time. Obama, who was in 2008, made the case he was running against the party the whole time. It's quite hard if you spend your entire, and we saw this in the Labour Party election in the UK as well, and we see essentially elsewhere across Europe. If you are a party machine creature, it gets harder and harder to make it to the top because someone else will come and say, I'm not the party machine creature. I'm a real person, which is kind of the Obama and the Trump and the Sanders pitch. And then kind of steal their lunch. Is that a cycle that's going to go back, or is that something that we might be stuck with?
So the Republican Party loves, and more so than the Democratic Party, loves a familiar name. There are sort of 2 big trends post-World War II for the kind of candidates the Republican Party chose. They chose veterans and they chose familiar names. The first time they chose they chose a veteran in 1952 in the form of Dwight Eisenhower. Then they went veteran all the way until 2012. Mitt Romney was the first veteran since Dwight Eisenhower. Was the first Republican candidate since Thomas Dewey not to have been a veteran.
This is also the first campaign in which no one was a veteran, right, at the top.
Rick Perry's veteran. So yeah,
wow.
So you can make that.
So that's like if a tree falls in the forest, doesn't make a noise. If you're a veteran and we don't know it,
And we don't know it, sure. And that tells you a lot about where that party was on national security in that election. I think it's
wow.
whether it was symptomatic.
I did not know that.
Cause was a separate question. Trump, this would be if they nominate him, as it looks very likely that they will. This is the first time that they will have chosen someone whose name hadn't appeared on a presidential ballot before, since Dwight Eisenhower. Now,
Although
again, they will be
also
choosing
the best known candidate.
as Dwight Eisenhower was the most famous American of his day, arguably. So this is a party that really loves a familiar name. Whether or not you could get someone that would come out of that comparatively nowhere as Obama did. And, Bill Clinton had been a governor, but he was a comparatively newish quantity.
He was at 1 or 2%.
Yeah, he was a fairly unknown person.
I had never
Whether
heard
you
of
get that
Sanders until relatively late in the day. And I'm his global affairs columnist, I'm supposed to pay attention to this. He came out left field pretty quick.
But he's filling a hole within the Democratic Party, which is he's done it very well in many respects. But if you were to say, at some point, a few years ago, there will be a challenger to Hillary Clinton who comes from the left of the party, and that person will get between 25 and 40% of the Democratic vote. That feels about right. On the 40% side, it'd be a little bit high. But the notion that there's a good, solid, strong left that wants about, 25 to 35 to 40%, that's about right. And he's occupying exactly the right space for his party.
I just started to think back to rumors of Jerry Brown, governor now in California for the second go-round. He was governor last century. Was rumored to run. He would have been sort of left center. He's getting more center. Mark Warner from Virginia, not so much left, but other people wondering, wow, if Bernie Sanders can do this, what could I have done, right? But we won't be able to see that.
That's one of the things I'm trying to look through is, what is the election after this look? It's either President Trump or Clinton, both quite possibly a one-term president, either thought, because they're going to be, either the end of the Democrat coattails or Trump's going to alienate everybody. the machines that come out of that will probably look quite different to what we've seen in this election, right? I mean, the election, what would be 2020 could look rather different to 2016.
So this is interesting too. The Whig Party, you don't hear too much about them, but they were really popular for a while. Republican Party freed the slaves, right? Now, if you think about that, and did anyone watch this interesting election night coverage on CNN, where it's this guy, John Lord versus Van Jones? The New York Times just wrote about it. There's 5 minutes talking about KKK and slavery, where it was intense. No one interrupted them, which was amazing for CNN. And no other guest jumped in trying to get airtime as their oxygen. And it was all this historical stuff and how things have changed and what don't we know, and thinking about these different parties, that parties do change and split. Allegiance, support, names, this could be one of those times, especially the Republican Party, where it does. And the Tea Party might become even more popular. Look at France and Le Pen, right? That a decade or so ago was a sort of a joke, but now it's a joke you can't laugh at there.
I mean, let's explore that a bit further. What do you think? What would a post-Republican Party look like, or that kind of world if we play it forward?
So, I think there's a couple of ways. There's a couple of ways to cut this. I mean, the big division, it seems to me, is a socially slightly conservative, but not particularly religious or evangelical side of the Republican Party that people thought were libertarians, but in fact were not necessarily. One of the things I think is really interesting about this cycle, incidentally, is the complete fizzle of Rand Paul. At one point, I would have thought there would have been a bigger chunk of a libertarian voter who just
coming in from that side.
Yeah, who just came in. Came in absolutely nowhere. So you've got this chunk of the.
Boy, I even forgot he ran.
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean, there's so many also Rands, but he's the one that I think has sort of was the one that at least purported to represent.
Especially when you look at his father and that legacy and building up all those years, and his father running and making some mumbles, and his father had some of the best ads on the web for a while. That Rand would have learned something and done more.
Yeah, I would have thought so as well, but I think he was speaking to constituents that just didn't really exist. I actually think the libertarian side of that party is just really, really small. So to get back to your question, what does a post-Republican Party look like? I mean, I think it divides up between, a kind of almost 19th century conservatism that is internationally almost isolationist, but in the sense that it's not particularly involved, but when it's involved, it tends to be quite military and quite statist.
Yes. The mistakes are that they don't want to bet a lot because they don't want to gamble a lot, but if they're forced to, they're going to put all their money in.
Big.
Yeah, it's very, all my chips are in, you're going to win.
And it's very statist. So in that sense, the notion of this kind of Trump international view is, with respect to Syria, I think his view is sort of like, we'll make a deal with Putin and let Putin fix that. If he kills a bunch of people, he can do it. So you've got that side of the party.
It's an interesting view, right? Because on one level, it's the kind of, he wasn't the one who says we're going to find out if it makes sand glow in the dark, but it's that kind of, we will go in very heavy. But at the same time, it's quite, so, we actually are going to risk many people's lives. We're going to bomb the crap out of stuff. We'll let Putin do the same thing, but we're not interested. We'll make the Asians and the Europeans and the Mexicans pay for their own security.
It's a kind of aggressive, almost performatively realist view of the world, right? Just values are completely us and ours and the hell with the rest of it. And, that combined with a kind of economic populism and a pretty heavy strain of 19th century white nativism, that would be, I think, the bulk of one new party. And then the other one would be, you're sort of, with the leftovers of the old Republican Party, the union of evangelical Christians and the kind of Wall Street.
So that's a tough. Wow, I was waiting for you to mention something about business, because that for many years was a Republican Party. Wall Street, Main Street, what's good for both. Yeah. But you just sort of said Wall Street or at least big business with evangelical,
which is not a happy marriage, but they were at least. But there is. But the notion. But they clung together long enough to make it work.
So if I throw in these two words, cultural conservative, where would they fit in this schema?
Well, this is the real question, isn't it? Because Trump's folks seem to be fairly divided. There's some people that aren't culturally conservative and are just angry, and they are making common cause with a cultural conservatism that certainly shares some of those traits with classic evangelical, religiously motivated conservatives. But that segment has not so far gravitated over toward him. There's and just frankly a little distrustful as well they might be. Doesn't seem to share their values particularly. And the notion that Donald Trump recognizing a power greater than himself, including God, I think is not something that's on the table. So, that segment I think is likely to, and they have been able to make sufficiently common cause on the question of strong defense, American values, and American values backed up by military force in their own kind of neocon way. And low taxes that I think you could make a party out of those things.
I mean, the Democrats are not much less divided. Right? I mean, the Bernie Sanders foreign policy platform, is not actually that. Aside from bombing, being slightly less egregious with human rights violations against ISIS, it's not $1 million away from the Trump position, which is to make the Europeans and the Arabs and everyone else, pay for stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The question of there is a where they meet is this notion that America should not be particularly interventionist in the world. There is a segment on both sides of the political spectrum, and that's always been the case that the world is better off. But the difference is in the sort of Sanders camp, the argument is, the world we may be better off when we don't get involved in these things, but the world is also better off when we don't get involved in the world. Whereas on the Trump side, it is entirely we are better off and be damned to the world.
I mean, how important is money in all this?
I was just thinking about trade and international stuff. Like, it's not as easy to pinpoint global trade stuff unless you pick up something made in China, which Trump and others have said somewhat effectively, like, we need to make stuff here. And now Rubio attacking Trump will hire people from America. And I love Trump's retort of, you've never hired anyone. Which he actually probably has in his Senate office, but the point was it's not a private sector hire. That there is some force here with global trade and people feeling a little bit concerned about it and trade imbalances. And it's tough to understand numbers. Whether it's 1,000 people died in this battle in the Middle East or we're $500 billion in debt to this country, it's tough because we don't see 1,000 people dead, right? It seems like a lot, and it is, but what is it really, and what's 500 billion? We don't know because we've not had it, and that's other people's money. And there's still anger there, but it's tough to latch onto these things. But you can see a bomb land, and that changes the equation.
I mean, how important is money here? Because Trump is hugely wealthy, but he's also just kind of one madman with a Twitter feed. And
what else do you need in America?
Exactly. It's all. I wonder whether actually the Trump story, paradoxically and unexpectedly, shows that with good name recognition, you actually don't need that much money necessarily to be able to make a huge splash.
Well, Jeb Bush, who I covered as a reporter, who is a legit public official, you can argue this politics, you can hate his family. It doesn't matter. That guy was into his job and doing a good job. You can disagree with his politics, but for public servant, I feel sorry for him, right? Again, I'm not a Republican or a Democrat, and I covered him. He had 150 some odd million, and Trump, the other poll. So I don't know if it's either or. There's probably a mid-center position that's a good public servant that raises a lot of money and does well, and that's probably the path in the future. But if you're actually saying something that's relevant to voters, and doing it in a way that voters believe is you, Donald Trump.
And you can do that directly now, even more than you could.
And then, better than directly, is have the news media, what we call the news media, cover you, let alone social media. Well, that could be, as we've seen, powerful.
I mean, the other lesson is that the more egregious the thing is that you say, the more it gets cut, right? I mean, Trump got his name recognition in part through saying outrageous things, not through saying safe middle of the road things, which was the Blairite Clintonite path to power.
Yeah, then you get earned media as opposed to, because earned media is media coverage, bought media is your ads, and you get earned media, and earned media is the stuff people watch, and bought media is the stuff people fast forward through on their DVR. That's the virtue of saying something really outrageous, and that's been Trump's style. Now, whether that will last in the long run is, I mean, again, how eventually momentum is going to have to be organized, and organization is to be paid for. Trump has the money to do it, but I mean, money is still important. If you're trying to run a campaign that's momentum only, doesn't have the money to organize, you're in trouble. This is one of the things about the Sanders race. He's been able to turn this early momentum into a meaningful campaign because he raised a lot of money.
Which Obama did as well in 2008. I mean, that was the
juggernaut.
I mean, the other lesson of the last 8-9 years is that the old route, which was you sign a bunch of semi-corrupt deals with Goldman Sachs and they fund your campaign, is now possibly, all the money that Goldman Sachs have signed off for candidates, or anyone else, has probably undermined them as much as it's helped.
I think Hillary it's a sticking point that Sanders has used effectively is like giving another speech to Goldman Sachs, how much money from JP Morgan et al. And I don't really own these stocks other than through TIAF-CREF, the Education Retirement Fund, so I don't even know what I own. And I'm not against Wall Street. I don't want to look at the stock things every day. Those numbers seem like another language I don't understand. But at some point, Wall Street exists, and it does things that help people get capital to start a business. And it could be a bakery in Iowa or a startup.
Which is how it was seen in the Clinton sort of Blair era of the 90s, right? That this was an engine for wealth creation, and now it's seen
and I think this gets to the Sanders thing about unequal results from the economic pie in America, and wealthier getting much wealthier and controlling the rules, and the middle class is shrinking, which weirdly Donald Trump is talking about the middle class now too. Just to add in more complexity to this, and like, how can this all be true? But Wall Street isn't bad, and yet it's being used as that.
I mean, it may not be bad in the greater scale of things, but if you're a candidate fundraising for, say, 2020, whether Wall Street's good or bad, too much money from it is actually might be politically damaging to you, right?
Sure. I mean, yes, your opponent can make the argument that you're in the pocket of Wall Street. That is an absolute classic. And Bernie Sanders has shown that you can raise enough money off of small gifts that you can keep yourself competitive in a primary. But a primary, the route to a primary is a small number of states that play out. So it's also a cash flow thing. It's a small number of states that play out in an orderly fashion.
Political campaigns are the ultimate startups that actually do need to watch their cash flow. Jeb Bush, for all his money, started to freeze staff and its spending a couple of months ago.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And he had a ton of money.
And then so come post Labor Day, there's the balloon payment. And at that point, because your map is much larger, you've got to really start spending money over this last 3 months. It gets really, really, it's unbelievably expensive because you have all these levers that you have to push, all of which we're readily right now vigorously debating the value of. Bought media, digital media, field, all of this other stuff. But you can't afford to leave any of those levers unpulled. And at that point, the Goldman Sachs money that you were being hit over the head with starts to look really, really well.
I mean, how is this? I mean, we've been talking about presidential politics, but how is the world changing in electoral politics at a much more local level? What are these? Do any of these lessons carry across?
I was just thinking back to when I was running, and like, all I cared about was, did I do everything possible within the letter of the law to win? Because then I could live with the results. It gets to your point, Frank, like, especially if the polls are saying it's a tight election, you do not want to lose close, especially the presidency of the United States. It's just too painful. Like, I started to think about Romney 4 years ago, almost 4 years ago. I was like, what does that feel like to come somewhat close? Some polls thought you were going to win, and then you didn't win. Man, that has to hurt. Right.
But Ed Miliband hasn't appeared in public really since he lost the election.
And that was not a close affair.
By reports, he just said, announced it afterwards he was unable to face another prime minister's question, so he was destroyed.
Right. And so when I was running, I raised a lot of money outside of my small suburban hamlet, Lafayette, outside San Francisco. And people then said, well, how can this young guy, I was young at that time, raise this money from even developers outside Lafayette? Like, there's something suspicious happening. And I knew them from fundraising for a hospital, but you can't explain that to everyone, but I didn't care. I'm willing to take the hits. They even said, Scott Talon's having keg parties. I was young. I wasn't, but now I really wish I had.
I was going to say, it's not cheers.
I want to remember two things before I forget them. That one you prompted, Frank and Peter. Frank, when you were saying something earlier, I've actually seen Donald Trump 3 times and met him once. The first time I saw him was at a polo match in the Hamptons, and it was just like 10 years ago, I think pre-apprentice even.
That feels like the ultimate elite thing to run.
Will not argue. Continuing. I simply shouted Donald because I was so fascinated he was there, and he looked and snarled. And I said, wow, that's really him. Fast forward a few years ago, I'm working in New York City for Diane Sawyer, Good Morning America. I'm walking up from 57th Street to get up to headquarters, and there's some hubbub happening outside Trump's building in Central Park West near Columbus Circle. It's the Apprentice show and Trump there. The guy looked pissed and unhappy waiting for the shoot. And again, I thought, wow, this is all real, right? That this is how he really is. Fast forward to his home, another elite thing for you to pick on Peter so we won't run against each other, is he had a fundraiser, and I saw him talk to little kids more than adults. And I wondered why, and I thought maybe it's because little kids don't ask him for anything. I thought that was fascinating. He'd rather spend his time with little kids talking, bent over, hunched over with a 6-year-old than a 60-year-old, which in Palm Beach is young, Peter. Back to you.
No, I mean, if you were running a local campaign, in the so how do you run? What does the presidential campaign now teach you about how to run a local campaign in say 2 years' time?
That is a great and difficult question, and I'm going to go back to the safe answer here, which is that union of tech, data, and behavioral science, because that stuff starts.
Not than just being a bit nuts and talking to kids.
Yes. Say whatever crazy thing comes to your mind as an media strategy and talk to children. Those are the two great strategic thrusts of a local campaign. Now, I think because the new tech and behavioral science and data stuff, it all starts off really expensive. A lot of the stuff is prototyped, scaled, used, demonstrated. You can buy it at a very high price the first time it's used, and then it declines in price rather precipitously. And there's an entire new industry cropping up of ways for local candidates to be able to afford, particularly tech and data that have previously only been accessible to presidential races. And and what we're eventually discovering is a tipping point now where tech has gone from being a cost center of a campaign, a necessary cost center, to being a profit center in the sense that because of the
Obama fundraising.
You can raise your money, but in terms of targeting your voters, who you don't talk to is as important as who you do talk to. If you're able to eliminate an entire swath of your electorate right off the bat, because you're able to model them as people that you don't need to have a conversation with, that saves you so much time and money. It's unbelievable.
And Obama's campaign did that really well, fairly stealthily, and surprised Romney with a lot of cable and even web shows in the last election. That Romney was buying stuff is more the traditional model of markets. And there's 211 TV markets, and like in Washington, D.C., we probably shouldn't see too many ads for people running in Maryland or Virginia, but because the TV stations are here, and we do. But Obama did a lot of stuff that was uber targeted, and some shows small audiences, small amount of money, but they started to automate it and do these buys that those small niches added up and made it.
Can you do that in a local campaign?
I mean, if the local race is big enough that you buy on television, sure. But that goes as how many doors do you go to? So I have a finite amount of money I can spend on the field. I need to talk to voters because the knock door is still the base unit of currency for American democracy. There's no way around it. You've got to knock doors if you want.
I knock doors, wore 2 pairs of shoes.
Everyone
knows doors. I've been really
you would tweet the fact you walked in to talk to Mrs. Jones.
Well, but no, I've been watching my council on the Underdogs in East London just since the last 3 months. And he's got a Facebook group going which just does all the kind of local news on the wall. It's a really small area instead of, we're talking about, fifth size of Georgetown, if that. But suddenly he's now, he's genuinely, rather than being the bloke who gets voted for because people always vote Tory in that council, he actually is a genuine sort of leadership kind of person now in a way I've never seen a councillor be before, because he actually does reach out to several hundred/thousand people. He can say, we're going to get an issue with traffic, we're going to protest this. I mean, like 5 people turned up to the protest, but the point is the whole Facebook group's already done it. And there are new models on a really local level that you can play with that I'm not sure even existed relatively, a couple of years ago.
So what you're talking about there is turning online conversation to offline behavior. Even though only 5 people showed up, that's 5 more people than otherwise. And my rule
and everyone else felt pretty bad about not showing up.
And you can talk about the 5 that showed up and do another one. And in this day and age, because we're so screen-based and digital, getting people out to do something is tougher and tougher. Fast forward, except it's the present, there's been these ghost sort of hologram protests. I just had one in Seoul, Korea, that they do the protests with people, but the holograms right there, and there's hundreds to thousands. And talking about kids, want to rewind to JFK, he used to go to schools and spend time talking to kids, and one of his aides said, Mr. Senator, we're behind. These kids can't vote. They're 6 years old. Kennedy said, yes, but when they go home tonight,
2 votes apiece.
They'll tell their parents and they'll vote. I thought that was something to think about. It's not always the direct, it's who says to what, and especially in the online world. And then I want to target your country, Peter, England, right? Great Britain. Have you seen Black Mirror?
Yes.
Wow, what a dystopian media, I don't know what.
I mean, in what particular sense? I mean,
The concept in every part of that series, and the fact that the series isn't linked with the same characters, and it's so cynical and so perverse in how much starting with the Prime Minister and the pig to what came after that.
This was a fictional sort of not the reason.
Which came first?
That's part of the, there's an element of kind of, I'm sure sort of radical honesty, some people in relationships, but it's kind of becoming true in politics as well, right? As long as everyone knows everything about you, there's actually, you get caught out by hypocrisy if you're really upfront about, well, Donald Trump is a very strange human being, but I think we all understand the ways in which he's very strange. Everyone knew that David Cameron came up from a very elite, posh background where they do strange things at Oxford colleges. Therefore, adding a bit more detail to that, and it goes, that was strange. But I don't think it changed anyone's vote. There's an element to which some of these, there are still sad scandals that will sink you. But by and large, you're kind of stuck with who you really are, right? You probably need to be.
Sure. It's the lie that gets you. If you're pretending to be something that you're not, and it comes out that you are other, if you framed yourself to the constituency in a certain way, yeah. If you pretend to be something you're not,
religious leaders who are very pious and lecture others on what to do, and then have an affair or doing other things, that's the killer. And in politics, so it's not just the lie; it's the attempt to cover up. So with Hillary, here's a scenario where it's President Trump a year from now. There's an email somewhere, I'm sure, that's pretty damning that we've not seen, that all it has to do is come out. And then people are going to accuse her of the cover-up on that, or if she tries to disassemble that particular email, that itself becomes a cover-up or potentially a lie, depending what we're talking about here. Imagine if you're Secretary of State, how many things you talk about that would require a private way to communicate. I get why she did it. I would never do it because of exactly what she was in. There's thousands of emails. Any one of us in this room or any one of us listening has probably an email in the past couple of weeks that we would rather not have made public. And we're not running for office. All right, so this is how she could get knocked out pretty quick, and it's Sanders as the nominee or Trump as the president if Hillary makes it.
But at the same time, I wonder whether Hillary has to say something as the thing as the Cameron defense. Most people know she's wanted to be president for a very long time. Most people know she's probably made comments that suggest that. Most people, the odds are that it would be a kind of, there's a post-Benghazi email in which she actually said, I wonder how this will affect my political chances, instead of really thought it. It's kind of already out there, right? It's a bit like,
You are channeling Black Mirror, are you that?
I've been doing this for a very, very, very long time.
So you saw the original House of Cards, and you couldn't possibly comment.
The original and best. You might think that I couldn't possibly comment. To an extent, this is kind of, whether we're looking at politics or warfare, and we're going to have a discussion on what the hell is hybrid warfare at some point before I leave town. A lot of this is, there's kind of nothing new here, right? This is actually the way that, Roman mob politics worked. And, a lot of this is really quite old-fashioned stuff. It's just scaled in a different way because social media means that the crowd is now a common size.
Or the crowd and hackers can find stuff out that maybe you don't want, not just with Hillary, but with anyone's campaign, and do stuff and insert themselves into things where you don't want them and interrupt the message. Or your own campaign, as both Rubio and Cruz and others have shown, can mess up your own stuff when you put it online too quick and don't fact check stuff.
How important are facts? Someone ran, I think it was the Washington Post, ran a story about, Donald Trump is running a campaign terrifyingly devoid of facts. You could argue that the Russians do the same sort of thing when it comes to Russia today in Europe. It's quite, people actually don't fact check stuff quite a lot of the time. So it's really, really easy to say something often enough and people are persuaded you're right.
Especially when you sound confident. There's a whole thing with psychology of tone and confident people. I have this one political friend in California. That person always sounds correct because of how they sound. Yes, they're into politics, but they're the Wizard of Oz, and they're not always right. But Trump sounds right, and he sounds sure he's right, right? And Cruz, I was watching the other night after Super Tuesday, he said a couple things that were pretty wrong, if not factually wrong, about other people's positions, and he said it, and no one challenged him on it. So it's not just Trump, and we all shade and emphasize Facebook. My students say is like, oh, that's me in my best day. They're not putting all their stuff out there. No politician is expected to put all their stuff. Like, here's the reasons don't vote for me, although that would be a clever ploy to refreshing honesty or radical honesty.
Opposition research.
Right. So I think the news media has gotten Black Mirrored, and it's been this way in the States, of being too much on entertainment. Just what the CBS executive Les Moonves said about it's not good for the country, Don Trump, but it's good for CBS ratings. And my colleague Lenny Steinhorn just wrote this column that basically said, not just blaming the news media for abdicating their responsibility in this election, not everyone, but a lot, but also the voters in the American public for being entertained by it.
And I'm not sure there's ever been a period in American politics when people cleaved strongly to fact, and the true and verified word was the absolute standard of political discourse. I mean, this is.
And some of your greatest politicians have been, economical with the truth on occasion. I mean,
so have you been, anyone been watching The Circus on Showtime? Mark McKinnon, Mark Halperin. It's 30 minutes of that week, edited live, and then aired Sunday at 8 o'clock, and they have the most recent stuff. But Mark McKinnon one time did a piece, and he took quotes from Jefferson and Jackson and people from the late 1700s and made a TV ad. And the ads were like, he rapes, he pillages, he plunders. They were worse than the attack ads that we see today. So to your point that nothing new per se, but all the more reason we need filters, especially with the web. We need trusted sources that can say this is BS or this is half right. The Post, Washington Post, Pinocchio test is
but at the end of the day, most ordinary voters don't look for that, don't feel they need that, and used to rely on broadcast media for it. But that is being been to nothing despite social media, right?
There's some, I think there's some truth to that. I mean, voters make the decision the way I think they always have, which is they're looking for someone that they feel understands their concerns and shares their values. And the fine detail of an argument is very much a secondary concern. I mean, actually, I would challenge most of the people in this room to remember any detailed policy that Barack Obama advanced in 2008. Almost no one can. He had policy, he had reams of policy, but that wasn't what this was about. He had, he spoke to very real concerns. He spoke to a very insulted part of the American identity. He represented change, and people very understandably were spoken to by that. And that's, and that doesn't necessarily mean his campaign was untruthful. It was extremely truthful. But the fine fact and detail is not something, in our biggest moments in our closest elections, has never really been that big a part of the calculus.
I'm just thinking, listening to you, Frank, speaking to your question of Cruz, and maybe I'm not the target audience, but he keeps talking about the Gang of Eight, which I know I'm pretty sure it's a group of senators and not a group out in the West. And it has something to do with immigration. But he talks about it as everyone should know this fact of the Gang of Eight, and it's really damaging against Rubio and Trump. So there's limits to the efficacy of facts. And if you think about people who purchase foodstuffs, they go into the supermarket, there are facts in the nutrition label. And while we might look at those, there are other aspects to the purchase that are emotional, psychological, and visual. So those also play a role. We're not Spock. We are not robots. We cannot just be logical with the facts. We do want them, but there's other aspects to our purchasing decisions, whether a voter or cereal.
I mean, it's also just this is America, right? Which means it's a system of checks and balances to the point where almost nothing can be done, which is
proven right now.
Well, which actually means that President Trump is far less dangerous than he could be in a wide variety of other places, because there's actually, as Obama and every other president in recent memory has proved, a real limit to how much he can do.
If President Trump becomes real, I think he'll use, even with Republicans in both Senate and House, he'll use executive power and rulemaking as much as Obama, which has been way more than Bush.
But also not enough to make massive changes to a huge number of things, right? I mean, there's still a constitution, there's still a bunch of...
But this is what I think people say is the beauty and strength of America is you can't F it up too much. There are these checks and balances. We'll make mistakes.
Then you have the executive authority gives you the opportunity to make, sure, the number of types of mistakes you can make are fairly limited. You can still make severe and calculated mistakes of incalculable cost. I mean, the argument for the importance of this is, first of all, the Supreme Court, which is a long-term series of decisions. You can make an incalculable mistake on that. And secondly, if someone else had been president in 2003, we would not have invaded Iraq. So then that is some, now there was more to it than just a simple presidential action, but that was an example of the presidency using not just the executive power, but also the enormous amount of political capital that comes to that office to push through a particular agenda.
Donald Trump might not have invaded. I mean,
the notion of him making a big mistake in the world by virtue of this kind of power, this almost performatively realist power dynamic is, I think, it's a very real possibility.
I mean, if we look at the rest of the world, all these trends exist there too, right? I mean, with these, we see the rise of unconventional politicians, whether it's in France or the Nordics. We haven't seen it on a massive scale in Germany, but it's really worth remembering that a German Trump would only have to get 25% of the vote, would not even get the chancellorship, and would have a very significant amount of control over what happened in German politics. Right? We've been there before, and they did very, very badly.
If you look at some parts of Asia, Indonesia, Joko, or however you pronounce his nickname, is pretty untraditional. I was traveling there in January, and people were saying they were surprised in some ways that he won. First female president or prime minister. That fact I should get right. Peter, you should fact check me. In Taiwan, female, right? And more anti-China than anyone in recent memory there. So there are some interesting things happening, even if they're not anti-immigrant, hard extreme. They're still different and changing and evolving. Look at Morales in Bolivia, that people said, no, we don't want you to run for another term. This is the leftist god of Central and Latin America, and now they don't want him around anymore.
That's one of the questions, right? Is whether you're going to move back towards the mainstream. Whether the election 2020 could see a raft of much more moderate, established Republicans with serious backgrounds, and possibly the same on the Democrat side.
If President Trump is there, that'll be good to see if he has enough to run or not. I think Trump's enough of a narcissist deal maker that if he does somehow win, and it's questionable whether he get reelected, he'd be an LBJ and say, I'm not running, right? It's better to be a one-term success than lose. The only thing worse losing, I think, for president is winning and then losing re-election. Jimmy Carter, this is why I think it's propelled him to do what he's done, right? So much, and it's tough. George Bush.
Friends wrote a great piece about actually what electioneering is going to look like in 2030, which was a much more data-focused kind of thing. You talked nothing about the candidates at all in that piece. Is that because you think they will actually, over time, become less relevant?
No, I think this is my own personal hobby horse that I tend to get up on this stuff, which is Trump is such a big personality that this validates the horse race coverage a little bit. But essentially, we tend to American focus, the coverage of American elections, and I think to a certain degree the British elections as well, tends to be very personality driven, to the exclusion of what I would identify as the really big stuff that is going to change between now and then. Of course, there'll be big personalities running in 2030. Of course, people will look to see how those people communicate their values, whether they connect, whether they, all of that stuff will still be true. All of that consumer calculus will still apply. But the unity of behavioral science, technology, and data will be tighter, and they will be more, and we see this in consumer stuff as well. It'll be that much tighter, and it will guide our experiences where we're still. That's why I chose to focus on that.
I could even see Uber, Lyft, Gojek in Indonesia, Split, the new one here, or other companies that don't yet exist, selling data from their riders to political campaigns, which may or may not include messaging as part of the ride. To your point.
Does the party system survive in this world? And it probably does, right? In most countries, it's clearly subversible in ways that it.
So I view, just to hop in here, I view Trump as the Uber of politics. That this idea, I've mentioned it before, of dysfunctional systems that we put up with, and then something comes in that's different, at least, if not new and improved. And
the dysfunctional system that you're referring to is the whole political system.
Yes, and akin with Uber was taxi cabs, right? That they're small cars in the States, yellow cabs mostly, especially in big cities. They're not especially friendly. You can't often see the fares, but now it's the exact opposite. You can predict the fare, you can split the fare, you can call your driver. Gave you these things that seem.
But that's been a very destructive model. It's annihilated existing taxi industries.
Hold on. We should have a whole nother series, Peter and Scott, talking about this. That has been the most uplifting, efficient, and effective means for moving people cheaper than I've seen since a subway.
I'm just suddenly worried that Frank might be the taxi driver of the political system.
But he's smart enough to switch to Uber with the data analysis.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny that you mentioned this. So David Plouffe, the campaign manager, Barack Obama's campaign manager in 2008, made a really good point just recently, which was.
And he's hired. And he's who does he work for?
Uber. Yeah.
Yes, he's now hired by Uber.
His point was, if anyone tells you how. I'm trying to think of this. If I'm still telling you how to win Iowa in 8 years, tell me to shut up. I have 18 months left of knowing how this stuff works, because tech and science is moving too fast for me to be relevant within 2 years. So, I mean, it is very possible that I will be superannuated as well. Possibly even if I say the sentence. But the question, back about whether or not political parties will continue to exist. Sure, I mean, they will be around. There'll always be parties that ascribe to a set of values and people.
It may not be the Democratic Party and the Republican.
Yeah, it's an organizing principle of the world, but the modern parties are constructed the way they are around one sort of fundamental economic truth, which is a tie between productivity and wages. That's always been the deal, right? As you become more productive, your wages rise. Well, that began to become unstuck in the late 70s and 80s. We still haven't connected them up again. And as long as that is the truth, but we're still training people to the expectations of that old deal, the parties are at risk for being broken permanently.
And which has also led to
reconstructed.
I just want to see if to throw the simple questions in a second, because we monopolize this, but as is our right as a panel. But that's right, Scott.
No, just there might be open fodder is that this has led to the gig economy, not just Uber, but DIY sites and craft sites and other people that may be unsure or their main job is not enough, that they then are able to add and supplement their income in these ways that otherwise before couldn't. They don't need a union to do it. And they decide their hours, which is why I don't think Uber drivers are employees, because employers tell you when to show up or you'll be fired. With drivers and other people in the gig economy, they decide how much and when they work. Over to everyone else.
Going off the last thing.
Yeah. A word about your background.
Morgan.
Morgan Stanley.
Not quite. Morgan Freeman.
Is that true?
No, I'm not related to him. Background, geography, Middle Eastern history. The U.S. is different than most places, I suppose, in that we've had the same two parties. That's basically it for such a long time. Most places in the world aren't like that. They seem to have parties that are changing all the time, new parties coming in. What is it going to take to break this? I mean, is Trump enough to do that? Is Sanders enough to do that? Or what's going to happen?
Sanders isn't, sorry, I interrupted you at the end. Sanders isn't enough. And that's not really his intent. I actually think he's, I mean, you can make the argument that this whole thing has been actually about drawing people into the Democratic Party rather than sundering, creating a sense of enthusiasm amongst a youth vote, which he's been able to do, who might not otherwise have been drawn into the process this early and might have been lost for the entire cycle. I don't know if it's going to be Trump, but what Trump represents, sure. I mean, there is a path that could divide the Republican Party, and what you just described on Uber and the gig economy, all of this stuff, the upset of the set of expectations which people were raised about how their lives will go, how they prosper and succeed, that can change politics in unpredictable ways. So I think that I wouldn't predict the end of the Democratic Party, but all of this unrest around labor, around contracts, around unions, around how does a human being form a path through life that they know will be successful? 30-year-old today makes as much money as the 30-year-old in 1984, despite the fact that 30-year-olds today are much, much more likely to be college educated. So
and have way more debt too.
And have way more debt too.
Not for home.
It's a long answer to a short question, but that I think is the closest likeliness of this thing.
They are the yin and yang. They are working together to stay in power. So however much we think they're opposing, they have a deal where let's not mess up the electoral rules too much, because we know that you might control the presidency this time and we might control the House this time, but it's just going to be us. It's a trade between us. So I'm not cynical. I'm an optimistic person in general. I think California, we believe that all things are possible. If there was a time that one party could split, I would say the Republican in the next 2 to 3 to 4 years have that chance. Then again, the Democratic Party was so rife with special interest groups that people said they might split into 10 parties, and they didn't.
I mean, there's always been a two-party system, right? It's very unusual, and you're right.
But it's not always been Democratic and Republican. So there's been some change.
For a while. But I mean, the UK system, which is maybe more typical, we had the Whigs, who were really, really rich people who were vaguely socially liberal, and then we had the Liberals, who were pretty rich people, still stupendously rich, who thought it might be nice to poor people. And then you had the Labour Party, which was a bunch of trade unionists who wanted to be nice to poor people, and they all kind of, the Liberals aren't quite dead yet. They disappeared, and then they reappeared, and then they get into a coalition, they compromise everything they ever believed, and they just I think there's a strength to a system whereby everyone has to decide by the time they're about 12, but they're left, right, and centre, and make it work. South Africa doesn't have it yet. It will when the ANC eventually splits. To me, that strikes me as being, as long as the left-right model works, which you can have, it's a separate discussion, having a system and then you might be Joe Lieberman who decides to make the politics has moved and he's suddenly on the wrong side of the divide, and then it's a tough decision time and you change sides. But by and large, I think there's a real kind of tensile strength to that system. But it's got limitations. Any other questions to wrap this up? Milena?
Milena Raban, geopolitical risk consultant and PS21 Global Fellow. Are you familiar with John Boyd, the fighter pilot from Vietnam?
The OODA loop. Yep.
Yeah, the OODA loop. So he had this other theory where you could mess with your opponent by making so many decisions
The
rapid
OODA loop
fire,
basically is that you
where you
observe, orientate,
destroy.
decide, and act. So you
Right.
look at, you see something happen, you look at it, you do something, and then something
Right.
else happens.
But if you throw so many decisions at your opponent that they don't have time to observe and orient their response, so that's basically what Trump has been doing. He takes these crazy positions day in, day out. Do you think that's going to be effective long term? Do you think that anyone else has ever employed this tactic and succeeded? Or do you think that it's sort of a symptom of our collective ADHD where we pay attention to something for 5 minutes and then we're on to the next thing?
Wow.
That was like 3 questions.
No, that was actually a good question. I think it's a good question for journalists to ask Trump if he knows this person, which I did not know till now. So now I got to Google and look this up. And if Trump didn't, is he a mad genius, or is he also smart, just following other stuff? But I've been amazed at how much other people react to him. The news beating the other candidates. The whole Rubio trying to out-Trump Trump with his juvenile behavior in the last week up to Super Tuesday, which sort of worked, but is not going to help his brand over the long term. But since I don't know this person and you do, Frank,
That is a terrific question. Yes, he has been able to wrong foot all of his opponents by not. I mean, the guy. For instance,
He's had no experience.
that's right. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
He's in the military.
Actually, Trump is very good at one thing, which is recovering from bankruptcy. And that's really whatever. It's I mean, I've been talking to another fighter pilot and said, the deal is if you're losing a fight, you change the rules of the fight. That's what people who go knife fighting do. It's what a lot of life is like. And actually, if you keep on going bankrupt, building a new company really quickly is basically a contract. But it's a contract that's a really useful one to be able to do if you're doing politics.
yes. And also, we're still going to get back to you to finish this up. Someone just compared Hillary Clinton to like a battleship and Donald Trump to Somali pirates. Super maneuverable, don't play by any rules, as compared to battleship that, is powerful, but it's got limits on it. So I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, but Trump also, he creates the appearance of being off message, of being able to say whatever comes into his head. And certainly that's true. But whenever he's actually pushed down to it, he says the same thing over and over again. He's been on it. I think it's one of the great messaging insights of the last decade. America used to win. We don't win anymore. I will make us win again. It's simple. It's clear. It meets his electorate exactly where it is, and it's instantly comprehensible all the way down to the children that he likes to talk to so much. And he comes back to it over and over again. So
And I think his policy position is actually becoming not unclear. It's going to involve raising barriers to migration. It's going to involve a chunk of being nasty for a bunch of people. It's going to involve a chunk of being isolationist.
I mean, with that New York Times secret tape, do we really know what his position is on immigration if it's so radically different in the secret tape than it is?
But what politician, to your point, Frank, earlier about Obama 2008, what were his positions, what's he's done, and politicians in DC at least only produce press conferences and promises. They don't do anything really lately in the last several years that we don't really expect too much that people are going to do stuff, which lets Trump come into existence. And therefore, how bad can he be? Because none of the other ones do anything anyway. The Supreme Court, I just talked to someone today, former Representative Connie Morella, and she was a little bit surprised, and so was I, like, why do the Republicans come so quickly out and say, we're going to object to the Supreme Court nomination? If they were really smart, they would have said nothing and waited through the process and said, we just don't find this candidate to be acceptable. They made themselves look partisan and obstructionist and not get anything done, which feeds these outsider candidates. And Sanders is kind of outsiders. Trump is quasi-outsider. Cruz thinks he is. But it lets people...
And Hillary, to her credit, never claims to be anything other than the most qualified candidate, which isn't actually how elections get decided. But but nevertheless, that's what she always says about herself. So no one, she's very upfront. I'm the one who's been in the room since the 1970s. I really get how stuff is done. If you want that, vote for me. If you don't, vote for Trump, which may turn out not to be the genius pitch that you think. But that's kind of what you
A lot of people don't seem too scared of Trump up to this point. I think people do want to be led. And I think they will follow the right leader in the right time if that person, he, she, it, or other, has a vision that resonates. Now, I'm not saying there's any current leaders right now or anyone's in existence, but we do seem to lack leaders, whether it's Reagan or Churchill, your country, Peter, that we want to follow and seem willing to do it and to be disappointed by them.
Churchill, interesting point, only political leader I can think of who didn't come up for a two-party system. He changed party once.
Wow. What an opportunity.
And he made that work, which I cannot think of.
And then was
any other
rewarded
example.
for his success after World War II by saying, thank you, we don't want you in
Right,
my
even the order of the boot, as he put it. My best-selling Kindle single, Churchill in the Trenches, the first account of Winston Churchill's 6 months on the Western Front in World War I, published in the 1920s, is available on Amazon, and it's actually not that bad.
That was the most wonderful, seamless segue pitch I've heard ever.
Before we move on, I do want to go back to what you said, Melinda, because I think
How are you going to top that?
I think you are entirely correct. I think you're entirely correct that Trump is strategically and deliberately vague on where he is on all of this stuff, and has already signaled that he reserves the right to change his mind whenever he chooses to.
Which
It's
the
like
John,
a
which the
spaghetti
John, the
method,
John
right?
Maynard
Throw
team's
it up and
defense.
see if it sticks.
Well, how about the wall? It's now 10 feet bigger.
Right, yeah, you
But
can
think
see that
about-
graphic.
Think about the clarity of 10 feet. People get what 10 feet, they can picture it on a wall, which probably never will be built, but it's easy to see this wall as opposed to the Gang of Eight and a position and what's going to happen and visas.
Well, I mean, so if anyone wants the very last questions, we'll take it, but otherwise we'll wrap up if that's okay. Perfect. Well, thank you very much indeed. That's been an excellent discussion. I shall go and try and turn this into a column. Thank you very much indeed.
Let's have a future talk about the gig economy.
The gig economy is a good one. What else have we got? That's a good one.
How about programmatic advertisements, whether they're political or not, what's happening?
And I think something broad on the nature of leadership would actually be a really good one, because I think the nature of leadership is probably not changing, but it's always really useful to look at.
And there's a lot of schools now that are teaching what I call unleadership, that it's not Churchill Gandhi. It's disruptive. It is questioning what a leader is, what we think a leader is, and how you can be a small leader L and take initiative and then back off, that you don't always have to be a leader.
I think there may be a one-word description for that, but
What's that word?
but
Can you spell it? How many letters?
I think there are a variety of ways of spelling it, many of them begin with B.
Oh, bullshit.
It's,
Here's a best-selling book that some professor wrote, literally about bullshit.
Yeah.
bullshit battles brains, as they say. It's
B3, that's Peter.
my new family motto. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
If you keep this, you'll be on our mailing list. We'll be doing more of these. And yeah, we'll look forward to it. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you.